Thank you, Frederik. De volgende, ja, we gaan van Vlaanderen, Frankrijk, Zweden nu naar Wallonië, naar Luik. Maar we gaan het remote doen, op afstand. Is Martin Saive. Hij is niet aanwezig in levende lijven, maar wel op video. En Martin Saive is een cartoonist uit Luik die graag buiten de lijntjes kleurt, omdat hij boodschappen probeert te figureren, te tekenen, die het uit de box denken, out of the box denken, inhouden. De boodschap is, dat proberen we toch eens na te denken over hoe we buiten de box gaan moeten denken. En de kracht van Martin Saive is het complexe eenvoudig voor te stellen met zeer heldere boodschappen, heldere lijnen en toch het buiten de lijntjes kleuren waar hij zo sterk in is. We gaan even kijken naar een filmpje.
What if you could remember everything, every single detail, every aspect about what you've seen or experienced? Awesome. You could, for instance, pass your class easily, finally remember the date of your wedding anniversary, or even finish a sentence of Marcel Proust and remember the beginning of it. It sounds pretty cool, but is it? What if you have to go to a movie and explain a movie you just saw to your friends? If it's an hour-and-a-half movie, it's going to take you an hour and a half to explain. And your friends are going to be lost before they get to the end of the opening credits. What about a 3-week trip to Bali? It's a nightmare. Luckily, this is impossible. Our brain leaves out part of the story. It simplifies to let us think. To be able to have a critical judgment, to summarize, and most of all to have an idea, you need to forget. That's what we call a simplification. And since you have no choice but to forget, you might as well make good use of it. As an illustrator, I decided to go a step further and forget even more. When I have content to express, I simplify twice. First the content, the data, the speech, the conference, and then my mental interpretation of it. I strip down everything to be left out with what's essential, both in the images and the content. You all have mental representation of how day-to-day objects should look like. This is a house, a car, a toaster, nothing really complicated here. But if you have to represent a concept, it gets tricky. How would you represent the industry? Something like that? Fine. But if you look at today's industry, it's far from reality. It should look more like this. To get around this, the key is to combine the mental images you have in your own head to create something new. Just like you would do for recycling, or to be more precise, for upcycling. Fine, these pictograms are efficient. But if you have to represent the whole conference or a complicated speech, this is just not enough. So I had to simplify and go a step further again. I looked into the history of Belgium and starting using something that comic book artists have been using forever, called ellipsis. An ellipsis is when you leave out part of the story. This can be used to condense time or as a stylistic method to allow the audience to fill in the gap with their imagination. Ernest Hemingway called that the iceberg theory that he developed while he was working as a journalist and had very little time to write articles. Let me give you an example. A few years back, I was invited to draw in a pharmaceutical meeting. And you can guess it's not my field of preference. After a few minutes, a Japanese chemist started talking about the importance of new drug regulation, globalization, something like that, while I was starting to melt on my podium in front of 200 people. Of course, I'm not an expert, so I drew this on a paperboard. Regulation, globalization, drug, approval. It's not the complete story, but if you use both techniques explained earlier, the real experts, the audience, were able to fill the gaps with their own imagination. And you know what? It worked. Everyone can do it. You don't need to be Rembrandt to be understood with drawings. If you can draw letters, you can draw pictograms. Think about the hieroglyphs. It's like learning a new international language made of squares, triangles, and lines. And when I say international, I mean it. A few months ago, I was working in China, and after a weekend in Shanghai, I came back to the hotel late at night. And there was no way I could explain to the concierge that my luggage was in the storage room. I tried everything I could, the charades, miming, nothing worked, until I drew this. 5 minutes later, I was in my room with my luggage. If after all of this, you still don't want to draw, these principles can be applied to anything, any concept, any ideas you want to express. You all use ellipsis and simplification in your day-to-day life. When you use a smiley on a smartphone, or when you write down kids on a to-do list. If you have a complicated message to communicate, I won't help you draft it. You're the expert. But if you focus on what's really important for your audience and simplify the right way, I'm sure your message will get through.